Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to another National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, talking mobile phone use in vehicles with Nestle. My name is Jerome Carslake and I manage the NRSUP and its many activities. So to please find out more, check out our website, register for the newsletter, and you can be kept up to date with all the new things that are coming up and about. Today's session, it's going to go for approximately 60 minutes. We've got plenty of time for discussion and questions, which we'll be taking throughout. And we'll just sort of interject them as they arise, and we may have to hold some later if Luke's touching on them as well. We're going to be recording this session today, and it'll be shared, as always, on the NRSUP website, as will the PowerPoint. So please go there to follow through again. We love to make sure these are as interactive as possible, so please send through your questions. You can type them into the question box right here, and as we touch on them, we'll ask. We do have a large audience today, so if we don't get to them, we'll pass them on to Luke, and he may be able to filter through them as later on. And so today, we are very, very lucky to have Luke Bryans joining us. He's going to be sharing his wisdom. Luke has been someone I've been interacting with quite a long time now through the NRSUP, and bringing them into the partnership fold. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about how he actually received unanimous support and a bold step of taking mobile phone use into Nestle. Welcome, Luke.
Hi, Jerome. Thanks for having me.
And for those of you that know, Luke is the safety, health, and environmental leader for Nestle. He's also passionate about change management, safety in a general sense, and a keen musician.
I don't know about that, but I'll take it.
We'll take it.
I'll take
Throw
it.
that as well. So with that, I think we'll pass over to Luke. Welcome, Luke.
Thanks, Jerome. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat to you today about driver distraction, and thanks to everyone for taking time out of their day to listen today. So, distracted driving, it's kind of been I think a bit of a passion of mine now over the last 2 to 3 years during my time at Nestle, and having the opportunity to share that today is fantastic. And I think to kick things off, what I wanted to do was, I guess, just share a key moment for myself on this journey. And it was at our sales conference about, I think probably about 18 months ago, off the top of my head. Filled, I was in a room, filled with sales, our sales team, sales leaders from Australia and New Zealand. And the moment was kind of, I finished our presentation, and what I was faced with was a room with 300 sales employees, deathly silent. You could literally hear a pin drop, and them staring back at me. And as I looked throughout the room, I could actually see, some tears in some people's eyes. Now, it's obviously not my intention to make people cry when I speak, and hopefully I don't do that today. But it was a really, really powerful moment. And the reason I'm highlighting that is, anyone who's worked with a sales team, is married to a salesperson, or knows a salesperson, knows that they're traditionally full of energy and high energy, and there's a lot of engagement. And to have a room full of those guys and girls, almost stunned and a little bit emotional, it was a real standout moment for me that kind of thought, actually, this is the moment where we've effectively moved the elephant, to use a term that I'll unwrap a little bit later. So very powerful experience for myself, and hopefully I can share some of the journey to get to that stage, and hopefully give you on the line something to take away and share.
Did you expect that reaction when you presented to them?
Not at all. And I think that's probably why it was such a powerful one for me that stuck with me, and I guess one that I've chosen to share today, because I think we anticipated this being received in a certain way, this stance, and to actually be on the receiving end of a very different response was awesome, but it was also quite confronting, because it took me a bit by surprise. Yeah, absolutely.
So listeners are in for a good session now. Hopefully
so. So I guess a good place to start for today would be, I guess, why we embarked on the challenge of effectively asking our staff and our drivers for Nestle that not to use a mobile phone at all when they drive. And I think, first and foremost, it tied really nicely into Nestle's, I guess, company values. The opportunity to contribute positively to the communities that Nestle or we operate in is always a strong appeal to the business, and this tied in really, really quite well to that. I think it's important to highlight that taking this stance with regards to distracted driving was not my decision. It was really something that that we put to the company, put to the leadership, and with well-informed research and information, it was almost a no-brainer for a company that looks to create shared value in the markets it operates in. And to build on that as well, there was a global focus on driver distraction at Nestle. So with over 300,000 employees across the globe, there was a focus from our corporate team in Vevey to actually make a difference in this space. And although that stance wasn't as cut and dry as you must stop using mobile phones as you drive, there was a definitely call to arms to act in this space, which we obviously leveraged. The second one was, I guess, around extending what's quite a strong safety culture, or very strong safety culture in our operations. So when I say operations, I mean our factories and our DCs. We have high risks there, from working at height to high hazard tasks, confined space, hazard materials, so on and so forth. And it's an area that we traditionally associate safety with in those factories and operational areas. And I think for us to actually apply the same mindset to what might be considered a less risky environment in the sales area was important, and it allowed us to really extend that focus, not only in that operational area, but actually say, although you're a driver or you're a salesperson for Nestle, we adopt the same safety focus that we have in our factories and DCs to you out in the field.
So you really made sure that everyone recognised the vehicle's a workplace, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that we kind of identified is that we kind of take that for granted sometimes as a mobile sort of sales team. Sometimes that driving is just what we do. It's a mechanism to get to our customers, and it's a mechanism in which we just do every day, that almost without thinking about it, to get to a place to do our work. And I think recognizing that vehicle as a place of work is a really important step of the journey. Yeah, for sure. And the last two, I think, go hand in hand. So if I think back to those initial discussions with our senior leadership team and our sales director in particular, Andrew, who's a particular advocate of this stance, he was quite clear that we're doing this for pretty much for one reason and one reason only, and that is to keep our people safe. He was a big advocate of effectively going above what legally is allowed in Australia, and he wants to make sure that we're doing this for the right reason, and that is 100% keeping our people safe. So it wasn't around making it difficult for our sales team to get from A to B, or making their working days longer. It was the right thing to do as a business, because we know that if we're asking our sales employees to drive and use a mobile phone at the same time, regardless of they're using a hands-free or not, then they're at increased risk of collision and injury. So that fundamentally became the backbone of the program, so to speak. Okay, and that kind of, I guess, how we went about it. Building on that last point around it being the right thing to do and keeping our people safe, tied really, really well into, if we're going to tackle this, then we recognize that we need to establish a consistent theme. And what I mean by that is, we knew this was going to be a complex area, and one that was going to be filled with questions, and we anticipated challenge. And I think recognizing the reason we're doing it, so the why, and then making that our consistent theme was really, really quite important to make progress in this space. So whenever we were faced with a communication task, or speaking to people about this new stance on distracted driving, or even answering challenging questions, the consistent theme was, we're doing this because it's about you getting home to your families each and every day. Now, I'm conscious that I'm speaking to an audience of people interested in road safety, and for us that that might be quite an obvious point, but that wasn't the case for everyone. And I think we had to, at every opportunity, come back to that consistent theme about, this is not about making your job harder or making your day longer. Like I said, it's about you getting home to the people that love you, or you getting to your customers in a safe way so you can win in the marketplace. But it's fundamentally about you being safe. And we almost had to go into, dare I say it, politician mode to keep bringing it back into that consistent theme, which was really quite important.
And when you said bringing people back home, did you have much of the problems at all when, like in some states, the commute isn't recognised as part of a work journey or anything like that? Was there any problems? Did people delineate between work and the commute?
No, they didn't. We didn't have any of those scenarios. I think being a salesperson and operating in that field sales space, you kind of working day starts the moment you leave the front door and you kiss your loved ones goodbye for the day. Probably plays a bit more of a role in our other areas. So people who actually come to an office for work and then commute to the office. But I think the mindset in our sales team is that there effectively is not a commute. I think to draw on that further, if one of our sales teams has a collision on the way to their first customer, effectively that could be commuting, but we don't look at it as that. We look at that as a workplace collision, so to speak.
Great, they're on the job.
Yeah. All right. Now the next part, I guess, was recognizing the context of the challenge, and what I mean by that is, I guess we could have looked at this in two ways. We could have looked at this as it's a compliance challenge, so we need to set a new stance, set a new policy, and then tell people to do it, and then that's pretty much it. It's a compliance issue. It's a compliance challenge. But I think it was bigger than that, and I think what we did is we recognized that the challenge ahead was not a compliance challenge. It was more so a behavioral change piece. It was about, and going further on that, it was about speaking to the hearts and minds of our people. So recognizing that we can tell someone what to do and hope for the best, but we actually had to adopt a behavioral change approach to this. We actually had to speak to people's hearts and minds, and we actually had to try and get them to buy into it, recognizing that's going to give us a greater level of success than perhaps in a traditional way, which might be we have a new policy and here it is, and you must follow it. So I'll touch on that in a bit more in a next slide. But really adopting that behavioral change approach was a real pivotal part for us. The next part around identifying the role of leadership. I'm sure many people on this call recognize the role of leadership, but we had to treat our leaders different to how we treated our staff, so to speak. And what I mean by that is our people managers. We actually had to identify them as key enablers of this policy. We knew that we had to sort of get them on board, adopting a behavioral change approach again, but we knew that they had to own and live this, bring this to life each and every day. And I think recognizing that some of our leaders, and I guess including myself as a safety leader, had to be prepared to be vulnerable. I share an example of that around my own kind of safety leadership was that I had to be vulnerable and actually say, look, I need to change. It wasn't until starting this journey that I sort of had to challenge how I sort of look at this space. And I don't mind admitting that I used to ring my family back in the UK when I left the office in Sydney. It was a great time to catch my dad before he went to work and my sister before she started a busy day. And to actually stand up in that room and say, look, I'm the same. I'm on this journey as well. But you know what? I see the value in it and I'm prepared to change. Change the way I look at this area was, I think, a good opportunity to prove that we're all in this together. And that's what we asked of our leaders as well. And we saw some really good examples of that come through, which I'll happily share as we move through the presentation. We also knew that other markets in Nestle had adopted this approach. So the UK had adopted the same stance with regards to driver distraction. And although we're, in some cases a very different market, we're also very similar to that. And what that allowed us to do was actually leverage that and say, you know what, the UK had done this and they're still doing really well. And it's actually been a huge success there. And we're also able to leverage some of the resources that help them deliver that success and apply them into our journey as well, which I'll share as we move through as well. And I think the last point is a really important one, is that we had to be courageous as a business and also as leaders. As I mentioned earlier, our SLT director, head of sales, he probably started this stance in saying the easy thing would be for us to say, you know what, you can drive in Australia legally and use a mobile phone with a Bluetooth or a hands-free kit. So why should we be any different? And I think once we decided to go down this path, we had to really be courageous and actually take this challenge head on. Appreciating some of those points I've talked about above, but number one, when we were faced with challenges, or we were faced with a roadblock or something that probably wasn't as anticipated, then we had to remind ourselves that we have to be courageous in this space to do the right thing for our people and also for other road users in Australia. Okay, so that's how we sort of went about it to start with. And what I want to do, I did mention at the start about moving the elephant, and I think this is probably the point in the presentation where some people think, what's this guy talking about? But what I wanted to do is just share something that was really an important tool for me individually, but us as we move through this journey. Now, I'll be the first to kind of admit that I'm not a behavioral change expert, so not a psychology expert. I've only touched on it briefly through my studies. However, I just wanted to share this with a disclaimer. Obviously, the reference is there, but this book, Switch, talks about a behavioral change model that basically became one of the frameworks in which how we tackled this topic. And I'm going to try my best to explain it, recognizing that I'm not a psychologist and I certainly didn't author the book. But it is quite simple, and that's, I think, what the real strength of this model was, that once we identified that we were faced with a behavioral change challenge, this model allowed us to actually work through that in a semi-structured way, and actually allowed us to make sure that the initiatives that we were investing in tied into this model somewhat. So apologies to those who have seen this. But I guess I'll just recap for everyone's benefit. But effectively, moving the elephant is creating behavior change. And what Dan Heath and his brother talk about, Chip Heath, in this book, is the first step to move the elephant is to direct the rider. So the rider represents the rational part of our brains, if you like, or our decision making. And what that means for us is we had to make sure that the people in our organization knew what we were asking of them. Okay, so it's the what, if you like, of what we're asking them to do. And if we couldn't do that, then we were never going to be able to succeed in this space. So once we talked to our people and made sure that everyone understood what the ask was and what the requirement was and what we were doing, the second part was to motivate the elephant. Now, motivating the elephant is an analogy for, I guess, our emotional part of us. So speaking, really, like I said earlier, speaking to the hearts and minds of our people. And I think, put really simply, it's the why. Okay, so making sure that our people understood why we were doing this. And I guess that comes back to that consistent theme at the start around, it's about you getting home to your families each and every day. And I'll share some of the ways in which we did this as we move through. And once we've directed the rider, we're told what we're expecting and what the change is. We've talked to the emotional side and talked about the hearts and minds about why we're doing what we're doing. The really fun part, I guess, and it's the part where an organization can really make a difference, is we have to shape the path. So we have to make it easy for people to do what we're asking of them, and shape the path for them to success effectively. So by doing that and ticking those three areas, we can actually lead the elephant to move in the direction we want, and it really helped us distill each of our initiatives accordingly. So I might do a sense check there, Jerome.
No, I think it makes sense, and I actually really like the logical sort of approach and how you sort of lay this out, and I think it's quite nice and simple. I'd love to know what other sort of people think who are listening online here. And I guess Andrew's got a little question here, just asking, look, I guess this would be part of shaping the path. Was there any form of advertising advice, or did you use in-house expertise to guide yourself moving forward when you're engaged?
Yeah, what a great question. I think we need to use advertising a bit more in safety. In this instance, we didn't. What we did rely on is like I mentioned earlier, the UK and using other markets that had gone through this journey. We were able to take the best of what they achieved. And as I think forward to what we're going to share, I guess some of the videos were basically advertisements. They were reasons why you should get on board. And although we didn't use an advertising agency or creative agency to help us get on that journey, we certainly adopted some of those advertising techniques to win the hearts and minds of our people.
But I guess being a global organisation, did you ever copy any things where like, oh, but we're Aussies, we're different?
We like saying that in Australia, don't we?
It's a common one, yeah.
Yeah. No, many examples of that in other areas, but in this one, I don't think we did. I think most people kind of appreciated that we have a similar road safety landscape to the UK in many respects. And what we did in that respect as well, we also found other companies that have been on this journey in Australia and said, you know what, these companies have got on board and they're still going from strength to strength. So no, we didn't come across too many of them in this instance.
Excellent.
Cool. So I will just just share one other thing, and this is that this book has has implications for a lot of what we do in safety. And I think if anyone out there is looking for for an easy read, a fun read, and very case study focused read around behavioural change, and I would really highly recommend this book for those of you listening if you're interested. And I don't get any royalties for that plug, I promise. All right. Okay, so what do we do? Is probably where the rubber hits the road. And what I want to do is just take you through each of the kind of initiatives we did and try and put them in the buckets of the rider, elephant, and shape the path to hopefully, I guess, explain the model a bit more. So no surprises. We had a safe driving policy that talked about what our driver distraction rules were. So really the fundamental part of the journey, I guess, but it was paramount we did that in a clear, succinct way so that everyone who drives for Nestle understands what the ask is. Okay, so we're speaking to the rider, making sure there's no uncertainty or no ambiguity about what is required to hopefully get that rider moving in the right direction. On a similar vein to that, we devised a set of frequently asked questions. And I don't mind sharing, this was one that we lent heavily on our UK counterparts for because they've been through that journey already. And it was a real nice build on the policy, but we actually found that most of the questions that people had were in this document, and the answers were shaped in a way that, again, came back to the consistent theme and were consistent to what we were communicating to our people. But it was just another resource that we could say, if there's any uncertainty or any questions, refer to this and then come and speak to us. And we found that this was a real strong tool in which people could refer to in their own time and actually really understand what was being asked of them, which was great. And the driver distraction rules. So although it formed part of our driver policy, we actually distilled them even further. So we took took it completely out of the context of the policy as well, and just said this really simply is what has been asked of you. So with those three areas, the safe driver policy having the aspiration, frequently asked questions, trying to really anticipate any challenges or any concerns that our people might have, and then really distilling those driver distraction rules even further, we were confident we kind of tackled the rider aspect of the behavioural change model.
Great, and just a couple of queries have come through just for clarification on the safe driver policy here. Stephen's asking, did the safe driver policy reflect all legislative requirements?
Absolutely, yep. So I think at the top of the policy it says that all drivers, Nestle and all drivers will meet legal requirements whilst on the road. So the aim there of tackling obviously our requirements and our commitment to our employees, but also the responsibility that our drivers have when they're on the road for Nestle. It then talked about not being distracted whilst driving, and then we built on that further by pulling out exactly what that means for our people throughout training as well. So the driver distracted rules.
Right, and Christopher here goes on, did you get input and or buy-in from your employees in the development of the safe driving policy?
Yep, absolutely. Really good question. So through consultation framework at Nestle, when we were devising this, we sent this via our SHE committees, via our working groups in the field sales environment, and also via our leaders as well to really have input into what the final policy was. On that note, we consulted with our team on the distracted driver rules, but there's obviously limited deviation on what those rules were in terms of what we're asking our people to do effectively. So although the wider policy was up for consultation, when it came down to the distracted driving rules, there was quite a hard line by the business because we knew what our aspirations were about keeping our people safe, and we were quite not strict, the wrong word, but quite clear on what our distracted driver rules were, what you can and can't do.
And just out of interest, how does that? You mentioned the factory floors. How did that compare with the factory floor side of things? Was it much of a difference at all?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It kind of tied into that point at the start I mentioned about leveraging the focus we have on safety in our factories. And I guess one example would be if you go to one of our sites, you can't drive a forklift and use a mobile phone. You can't even walk around on a mobile phone unless you're still standing still in our factories. And one of our golden rules as a business is that you can't use your mobile phone while walking around. So although it's a very different environment, there's a nice synergy between what we're asking of our Nestle employees operationally and our sales team, because at the end of the day we're just one company. We want our people to get home safely at the end of the day.
So there's more inconsistency.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, so the elephant. How do we move an elephant? So training and awareness. Obviously, with most safety initiatives or safety programs, there is a training and awareness element to it, and I'll expand on this a bit further. But it was obviously fundamental that we got in front of our people, and we told them what we're asking of them and the why, and we gave dedicated airtime to that, to increase awareness. What we found is that the actual awareness was probably not where we'd anticipated. I think driver distraction is one of those topics that we just seem to accept when we're on our roads. Like, it's you look across at the lights and you'll see, most days you'll see someone checking their phone or talking on it, and it was kind of one of those things that I think our salespeople or our people in our business had, almost become desensitized to. And I think through the training and awareness piece, we were able to really highlight what risk there was to you when you drive and you either text or you use your mobile phone to talk, and draw awareness to the risks out there, so that we could then say, these are the risks, but we don't want you to be exposed to them, and this is why we're taking this stance. The resources and support part built on the training and awareness, but there was a couple of resources that were really powerful, and I'm going to share some of those in a second. But in terms of creating that emotional buy-in, and getting our people on board, and I guess getting them to stare back at you in a room, 300 people, and see some tears in some people's eyes, but seeing them just stare back in almost disbelief was largely due to the resources that we use. And to go back to Andrew's question, one of those videos which I'll share in a second, in terms of if you judge a advertising campaign by how it makes you feel, this video was the best advertisement I've ever seen, I think, in terms of getting buy-in. So the resources was a really big part. And the last one under the elephant piece was a launch event. So this was the event I was speaking at when we launched this, and I think what was really powerful, and it was almost by accident to start with, but then as we went through the journey, we realised the power of launching this event at an annual sales conference was a huge success. Now, the reason for that was our sales guys and girls, fired up for the year. Here's your big event. Here's your big conference. You all come into Sydney for the start of the year, and you hear what the fantastic products we've got that are coming out. And you know what? What's equally as important as our new products and your sales targets and your sales goals is our new stance on safe driving, and specifically driver distraction. And I think what that did is that gave that a level of importance in line with all the other priorities that our business has. And it basically helped us get that buy-in. And I think the alternative would have been to say, here's the year ahead, here is your priorities, let's go out there and win in the marketplace. Oh, and by the way, we're asking you not to use your mobile phone whilst you do that when you drive. Would have been a very different message. So by giving it the launch event and I guess the attention that we felt it deserved, gave a strong message to our people.
So just on that, how did you know, like question from Corey and Daniel both aligned, how did you know you had a distracted driving issue, and how are you measuring, monitoring success, and how they adhere to the safe driving policy?
It's a good question. So how do we know we had a distracted driving problem? I guess we didn't specifically think we had a problem at Nestle, but if we look at Nestle as a subset society, we knew from some of the research that we were that we got from overseas, and that if you look at Australia research here as well, there's no doubt amongst the industry that if you're using your mobile phone, you're talking on your mobile phone whilst you're driving, you're more distracted. That's almost a fact now. So by saying to our people, and by our managers calling our drivers when they're on the road, and our drivers speaking using Bluetooth when they're on the road, then we knew there was a case where our drivers were more distracted than we'd like them to be. And the flip side of that is that if you take that one level deeper, we know that our drivers were distracted and therefore at increased risk of not making it home at the end of the day. So although we didn't identify a specific problem in our own business in Australia, we did know that globally, road deaths are the biggest cause of deaths in Nestle world, in other markets. And if this was a way in which we can make a positive impact to not only address a problem, but actually go above and beyond compliance and actually make a more positive contribution to our own people and road safety in Australia, then it was kind of a no-brainer. I think the second part of that question was, how do we monitor? How we monitor if people are doing the right thing?
Yep.
That's a really a real challenge for us at the moment, in the sense that we decided to tackle this journey, this challenge, from a get buy-in, get people on the journey, and adopt a behavioural change approach. The alternative would have been a compliance approach and checking if people are doing the right thing. Now, we don't check our drivers or spot check or try and catch our drivers out to see if they're not adhering to the policy. What we do is we do make sure our drivers know that if there is a collision or there's been an incident, then we do have the means to check phone records to check if the phone's being used. But I think coming back to that first point, around it being a consistent theme, we're trying to focus wholeheartedly on getting people to buy into it and get on board. And I think as we move through the presentation, you'll see that some of the conversation we have with our teams, people were coming to us and saying, well, we don't want to wait till the date of 31st of July that we're rolling out in 3 months' time. We want to act now and we want to get on board with this. And I want to share this content with my family as well. So, that's how we kind of approach it.
And just a query from Amy. She says, so you've avoided having a fatality at Nestle, luckily?
In Australia?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. And one question here from Julie. How long did it take to go through the consultation, and the implementation process? What sort of time period were you looking at?
Yep. So from when we first realised we wanted to make a stance in this space, our first step was to make a safe driving policy that incorporated this aspiration. That went through a number of iterations through consultation, roughly around 2 to 3 months in terms of how that looked. And then once we had a safe driving policy that was at draft stage, that went out to the wider business for consultation for another sort of 4 to 5 weeks.
And one last question here from Vanessa before we move on. Are you prepared to share your safe driving policy and distracted driving rules?
Absolutely, yeah. They're on a few slides time, so we'll come
Excellent.
back to that in a second.
Preempting nicely.
Okay. And then in terms of shaping the path, so coming back to the model, I mentioned earlier how important leadership was in this journey. And by identifying our people leaders and actually briefing them ahead of the change and involving them in the consultation process, what that allowed us to do is actually put them ahead of the change and actually be change agents for us, as opposed to being part of the change. They were able to own that and help us with that journey, which was really powerful. And also recognizing that our people leaders had a specific role to play in this journey. For example, they weren't able to expect their teams to be able to answer their phone immediately. So if we're asking our people not to use their phone when they're driving, our people leaders had to reset expectations. So although someone might not answer their phone immediately, the expectation is that they ring me back within an hour, for instance, or to use one example. So again, involving them in the process was really, really critical. And another one was flexible working. And I will touch on this a bit more in a second, but what we found was that as an actual enabler for this policy, we actually had to be flexible in how we worked at Nestle. Now, I guess by coincidence, but it wasn't something that we drove specifically, but at the same time, Nestle was transitioning to a more flexible working approach, agile working, to use another term. And without that change, it would have been really hard for us to make traction with this policy. We have people in our business that are required to dial into Europe, at 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And a lot of people in our business were taking those calls as they left the office. So, leaving the office at 5, taking a teleconference with Germany until 6, get home, make dinner at 6:30. But we had to flip that and say, it's okay if you leave the office early, get yourself home by 5 o'clock, take the phone call, and then you can obviously meet your family commitments as well. So that's just one example, but the flexible working piece was a huge enabler for us to be able to say, look, we believe in this policy. We're doing it for the right reasons of getting you home safely to your family. And one way in which we're enabling that is for a flexible working policy, which really helped.
Was it very flexible beforehand at all?
Not as flexible. I think Nestle also identified that we were moving towards a more flexible work environment and wanted to offer that to our people. What we have today compared to what it was prior to the policy, quite different. Much better now in terms of being able to offer a bit of work-life balance to people and actually helping people for their other responsibilities as well. So.
And what on the sales people? What's some of the measures? Is it around number of calls? Is it around number of visits? What's their performance measures, and did that impact on this at all?
So I'm not an expert on sales KPIs, but they do have a planned call route. So one thing in which we're able to do is plan our salespeople's route out for the day, so they know where they're going. They're not necessarily KPI'd on number of visits. One of our learnings from the process was one of our leaders. She said to the team when briefing them on this policy was that you're paid to be in front of our customers. You're paid to win in the marketplace by building relationships and being in front of our customers. You're not paid to make sales over the phone while you're driving over a harbour bridge or while you're driving to a customer. We want you to get to your customer and do what you do really well, which is win and build relationships and get our products out there. So much so that we don't want you to take risks while you're getting there. So there was no conflicting KPIs during this process, which is an important consideration, sure. And that touches quite nicely on the leadership part. So the people leader briefing and also recognizing the leaders that could really bring this to life was a really important part to shape the path. So by ticking those areas, it really sort of helped our people achieve success and made sure there weren't any conflicts in what we're asking them to do and what we're actually shaping them to do when we're out there as a business as well. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just share some, I think going back to one of the questions, share some of the resources we presented or we used, some of these from the UK, some of these from other markets. But I mentioned at this in an earlier slide that not everyone appreciated how much distraction had an impact. And I think to speak to the hearts and minds or to move the elephant, whatever analogy we use, we had to kind of convince people that there was a problem here. And there was a risk and that we don't want you to be exposed to that risk. So this is one of the slides, again, not rocket science, but quite powerful in the sense that people didn't realize how much more likely you are to have a collision doing some of these activities. And that sign on the right, every time I've probably seen that sign quite a few times now, and I still struggle to read the two things at the same time. So that kind of became a little bit of a logo for the program, if you like. But this is just a real snippet of how we sort of went out there and just spoke to people and said, look, there is a real risk here. And once people realize that, they actually realize, well, I don't want to drive and be distracted. I actually get why Nestle are doing this, and I think it's a good thing. Okay, in terms of what we asked of people, I think this goes back to the lady's question earlier. So this was what we communicated. And again, there's nothing on here that is particularly out there. It's quite straightforward. I won't read it word for word, but it basically is what you'd expect from a policy saying that we don't want you to be distracted when you're driving. And there was no real challenge to this. It was just like, this is what we're asking, and we're going to do what we can as a business to support you in that process. And we hope you sort of come on board as we move through it. Jerome, this content will be shared.
Yep, it'll always be available afterwards, so everyone can go through and see it. And I think one of the interesting things on the driver policy as well, in the stats you had up earlier, I think a lot of people don't sort of realise when you're actually driving as well, if you get very emotional behind the wheel, your risk is tenfold. So there's been no research on the compounding effect, say on the mobile phone, you're having a pretty crank, because you can see some pretty animated people in the car at times when you look around, having some bad calls. So you think about the moment you get excited behind the wheel, you can get tunnel vision with as your adrenaline goes up. All these other sort of factors can happen as well. So it's a difficult one. People get on the road and how you actually make that case on them.
It is, and we actually kind of tied into that a little bit with some of the conversations we had and some of the training around the opportunity to, when you're driving between customer calls, for instance, and not feeling like you have to be on the phone to your manager or to a customer, actually allowed you to be a bit more mindful and actually take a bit of time out and reflect on your call, or reflect on your next call, or just be in the moment. And I think, that kind of popped itself up through discussions from within the teams when they said, you know what, this is how we can use this time to actually show that we're being mindful and that we're not stressed and we're not at risk through that aspect as well.
I like that bit of mindfulness. Because I know salespeople, as you mentioned, they go, miles, 100 miles an hour. How did they take that?
Yeah, it was a kind of mixed response in the sense that they are 100 miles, 100 miles an hour. But I think that one term that stuck with me is that my manager talks about a lot is what interests my boss interests the hell out of me. And once we had our leaders owning this process and then saying it's actually okay not to be on the phone rushing from call to call, it's actually okay to listen to a podcast or listen to some music and be a bit more mindful about how your day's looking, was actually a bit of a welcome relief in the sense that we're so busy as a society, rushing from call to call, from conversation to conversation. The team started to realize that actually, yeah, I can actually take a bit of time for myself and compose myself between calls, or just be a bit less stressed as I'm going throughout my day, which was it wasn't the aim of the policy and it wasn't the aim of the stance, but it was a nice kind of added benefit, I think.
Geez, you can almost see a bit of a Sales Works podcast club. Like, instead of the old book club sort of things, they get in, you might have a topic you throw out and these guys digest it. I wonder what they'll be looking at.
I'll ask them for you. Okay, so that was the policy. Sorry, just jumping around a bit. In terms of some further resource and support, so these are just real sort of snippets from our intranet and our Safe Driving page. You can see a couple of examples there under the Safe Driver resources that I talked about. So this driver distraction FAQs, some of our wider driver safety resources, and our safe driving policy. I'll touch on the video that you can see here in a second. But one of the examples that we did share with our teams, and it's on that page, is the Bluetooth or the Do Not Disturbs Bluetooth setting on an iPhone. Now, I'm conscious many people on the line might know about this, but I was actually at a conference this morning, and a road safety conference, and there was someone I was chatting to who didn't know about this. So I guess if there's one positive to come from this webinar, and you take this away and you didn't know about it, then that's only a good thing. So this is a fantastic feature, I guess, on an iPhone that not all our people knew about, and I didn't know about until it was brought to my attention. For those of you who don't know, it's really simply when you're driving and your phone links into Bluetooth on your hands-free, it actually sets your phone to Do Not Disturb, which is great. You won't receive any phone calls or text messages, but what's really good is that it actually texts back to people who've called you or text you and says, look, I'm driving at the moment, I'll give you a call when I get to my destination safely. And there is a feature, if someone replies with urgent to that, then they will actually get through for obviously emergencies and whatnot. So this was a really good tool for us, in the sense that obviously it helped shape the path, it helped people do the right thing and do what we're asking of them. The other thing, I guess, from a leader's perspective, so whether myself as a safety leader or some of our leaders in the business being champions of this policy, is it actually allowed them to visibly support the program as a leader. So if someone texts or someone called one of our leaders when they were driving, then you get this back. And what we actually found was there's a bit of a ripple effect. So someone would get a text message back and going, oh, well, that person's obviously got this Do Not Disturb. What's that? Or actually, I'm going to do that. And it kind of rippled throughout the business. And I guess if there's one thing that you can do, listen to this call, and if you don't already, is recognize that if we do this, then every person that rings you or texts you when you're driving gets this response. There's a chance they might adopt the same approach, and yeah, who knows, we might be part of a bigger change. So
if you don't know about it, it's a bit hard to implement. And Stephen just makes the point here that Android Auto does a similar function, and Scott says the same thing. Samsung phones have also have the Do Not Disturb function as well. They've had it for many years, actually. So if you have those two items, those mobile phones, you can use it there as well.
That's awesome to hear. And I was actually asked that question this morning and didn't fully know the answers to that. So that's
got it now.
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Whilst we're on that, talking about the technology, have you looked at any other sort of like blocking technologies to enforce your policy, or monitoring technology in phones? Just a question here from Julia.
Not at this stage with the wider audience. Myself and a team of our fleet safety team are exploring some technology around at the moment that doesn't allow the phone to be used whilst driving, and also flags if there's been an attempt in terms of what your score is and around a coaching approach. But we haven't implemented anything around that yet. But that's not to say that that's the next logical step, for sure. I just wanted to call out, just going back to the earlier point on the Do Not Disturb feature, is how I mentioned there's a ripple effect, and how you don't know if you do it that someone else might get on board. And I want to share a real example for that. For me, was this is a screenshot from a friend of mine who's a close friend and notoriously shall we say, a petrol head in terms of loves his driving. And I was almost bowled over the other day when I got this message back from him, and I texted him a few times and never got it back over the last 3-4 years. And to actually get this back was a bit eye opening. But I actually asked him, tell me about that. I didn't know you used that feature, and he said, well, I know you're a bit of a road safety advocate, and I've got that message back from you before, and I think I saw an article in the paper reminding me about it, and I thought, you know what, why do I talk when I'm driving? And I think that just shows the power of that you can actually have other people if you adopt this. And I think it's a bit of an eye for me, and hopefully you're not the only example.
Now, for a layperson, what's a capo?
Yeah, that's probably what everyone's thinking, aren't they? What's the actual conversation, not the automatic response you can see. Real quickly, it was a capo is a device you put on your guitar, and my friend Dave and I were playing a gig that night, and he stole my capo, so if I couldn't play the guitar in the right key, and also I realised we didn't have an extension lead to plug our amp into, so if he got on them, that would be great.
That's great. And whilst we're talking on music here, Ron asks a question: are drivers allowed to listen to music as long as they don't touch any of the controls on their phone whilst driving? Yeah,
it's a good question, and yeah, we don't have a stance where people can't listen to music. In fact, it was one of the questions that we got asked is if you're asking people to not use their phone to talk to people when they're driving, how's that different to talking to someone who's in the seat, and B, how is that different to being distracted by a podcast or music, which are really good questions. And I guess the key quote there is what we said to our people was, when you're speaking to someone on a mobile phone whilst driving, it's an interaction that relies on really only one sense, and that's hearing and talking. So if you're driving along and something happens in front of you, whether it be a car pull out or there's been a collision, and your focus turns to that, there'll be a silence on the call, but that person is still expecting you to respond. So whereas someone in the car would actually see that, and I think unless they're not concentrating or not seeing it, they would not expect you to be talking. So a conversation in the car is very different to a conversation on the phone, is how we shared that. And likewise, listening to a podcast or listening to music in the phone is a one-way interaction. You're taking in information, you're not providing or you're not engaging. So that's the stance we took.
The other bit I'd add to that as well is, like, you imagine if you're a work colleague, I've called you, Luke, out on the road, and they're going along, and you're involved with an incident, and I've initiated that phone call, and I hear it all happen, and then I've got to live with that.
Horrific.
Exactly. The impacts that can have is broad.
Absolutely. Okay, so I guess on that note, one of the resources I really wanted to call out, and again, recognizing that there are people on the call that may have seen these resources before, and obviously like the Do Not Disturb feature as well. But for anyone who hasn't seen this video, I think, and I want to credit this as a huge part of our journey and getting people to buy in to why we're doing this. And if you haven't seen it, it's I'm not going to show it today because I don't trust technology, but it's on YouTube.
It does slow things down a bit on videos.
Never show a video in a presentation. I would, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to check it out really quickly. It's a group of young people talking about why they text and why they use their phone whilst they drive. And at the end of the video, they're confronted with a victim of road trauma due to distraction, and it really brings home, I guess, it's quite confronting. This is why we do what we do when we're driving distracted. And I think by showing that video at the conference that I mentioned at the very start of the presentation, really helped us get that buy-in. And I think someone said to me afterwards, you have to be a special kind of person, and not in a good way, to watch this video and still want to go out there and drive distracted.
It's very powerful.
And I think it's AT&T is
the US,
yeah.
And it is it gets you out. It's not shock, but it draws that emotional link, which we're seeing a lot of campaigns which are being very effective at doing.
It did, and I can see it now, and I can feel it in terms of the room. After watching this video, there was an utter silence. It was really powerful, and I've watched this video many a times, and every time you watch it, it's still as impactful. So for those of you out there looking to embark on this journey, or just want to try and help younger drivers understand the risks out there, it really speaks to younger drivers with the message it portrays. So really good, great work from the guys at AT&T. In terms of best practices, so the next few slides, I'm just going to quickly share some of the content from our training. And again, recognizing that what we were talking about was not rocket science, and I know I've used that term a few times, but it really was simple, easy advice that people could kind of use and take and work with to get on board with what we were asking them. So these are just some examples. Some of them don't need any explanation, but one I will call out was talking to your customers about the changes and why we're making this decision. So when we rolled this out, we recognized that some of our customers are used to calling our sales team and then being on contactable most of the times of the day. And when we rolled this out, we didn't say, right, here's the policy and tomorrow you can't use your mobile phone. We said, this is coming. Okay, this is coming in 3 months' time. What we want you to try and do now is start to think as teams, start to think about you as individuals, about how you're going to get on board and what you can do to make changes to your day to remove the distraction from your working day. And one of those was talking to your customers about our policy and that you might not be able to be contacted every minute of every day. And I think some of our sales teams were a bit apprehensive of having that conversation, expecting maybe a small a bit backlash in some instances. But what they actually found was that our customers were like, okay, well, I get why you're doing that, and actually that's a really good decision to make, and that's a really good policy because everyone, most of our customers are all road users, or they've all got someone on the road, or a child who's just starting to drive, and everyone recognised that not driving distracted is actually okay. So that was a real positive from approaching it that way. And the other ones around putting your phone in the boot. I know many of our sales teams do that. Sorry, our sales team members do that. And we also said, really obvious point, but call before you drive. It worked before there was times when there were mobiles. And we've got a workforce at Nestle of some of our sales team have been with us 25, 30 years, so they certainly remembered that point. And the next one was around recognizing, again, going back to that context of the challenge at the very start, I think was recognizing that this was a new way to work. And we made a conscious decision not to say, this is what we're doing, and tomorrow you can't use your mobile phone. We actually called out and said, look, for some of you that are on this journey, it's an addiction cycle, just like many other things. And by giving people a bit of a lead up period to when the policy became effective, was allowed them to give them the best chance of succeeding, I guess. So we encourage our teams to get together, talk about how they can get on board, and actually share good examples. So we had one person in our team who has a very long drive in regional New South Wales, and I remember him posting or emailing to his team of 10 others that then went effectively viral in Nestle, saying, look, if I can drive from A to B in regional New South Wales and not use my phone, then I think we all can. And then we started to saw that bit of ownership of people really running with it and making it their own, which was really good. Just going to touch on the flexibility piece I mentioned earlier. So I think I did call it out and just say it was a key enabler, but I think it's one that we probably underestimated to start with, and we, by having this policy running alongside, actually allow people to rearrange their working day, and it also encourage managers to reset expectations for their teams. So, not expecting employees to be in the office, 9 to 5 every day. Actually saying to their team, it's okay if you don't answer your phone, just give me a call back within the next half an hour or next hour or so. We also found that it was common practice in our teams for weekly huddles to happen on a Monday morning. And again, that was that kind of led our team to sort of maybe dial in if they were driving. So teams reset that expectation around when their weekly huddles would happen at a time that everyone was agreed they wouldn't need to be on the road for. Again, making sure that, hoping that people then would be able to dial in from home before they started or at the end of their day as well. So a bit of a call out there. And just the last couple of slides from me, or last slide from me, was one thing that resonates for myself, going through this journey was not underestimating our people. What we found was really, really powerful was people stood up to the plate, and the safety leaders were popping up throughout our business, where we would least expect it. We had our field sales manager speak in front of her team, saying, I shared it earlier, but saying, look, when did we have the most dangerous job in a company? When did that happen? We traditionally think of high risk environments being in a factory or a DC, like I mentioned earlier. But now, if we get it wrong, or if we make a mistake, the the consequences can be catastrophic for us as field-based staff. So this is just one way in which we can help reduce that risk to you. And what was really powerful was those leaders were actually saying, and if you're not on board, then you know what, maybe Nestle is not the right place for you, because this is how seriously we value you and we value safety of our people. And that wasn't a scripted, coached message that we put into the mouths of our sales leaders. They were kind of making it their own and sharing those insights as well, which is really powerful. Again, one thing that was almost a surprise was that we thought people would really embrace and need that 3-month lead-in period, whereas some of our teams are coming up saying, I don't want to wait till July 31. I want to get on board now. I want our team to do it now, because what you showed us and the journey you brought us on, there's no reason to wait. It's clearly the right thing to do, and it's something that I want to do for my family and all road users, which again was probably something I didn't expect personally, but I think it comes back to not underestimating your people. Once you really speak to those hearts and minds, that's the power of what we can do. And to build on that point there was people want to extend it to their family and friends. The video, the It Can Wait video, or hashtag It Can Wait as it was commonly known in Nestle, that's such a powerful resource to share with not only people at work, but the people you care most about, and really creating change in those people as well. Which again it doesn't matter if you're a Nestle employee or you're a family member of a Nestle employee, or if you're just another road user in Australia, it's still a life. And if we can make a positive impact in that space with some of the resources, then we jump to the opportunity.
And we'll share that link to everyone as part of the email out afterwards.
Cool. And just one other analogy or story I'll leave with you was what we expected to be a real challenge, and some backlash on, was summed up in this one story I heard from our sales team and sales team member in New South Wales. He said he was at a barbecue, and someone asked him, how's work going? And he said, yeah, it's okay, it's good. Yep. Nestle have just told us that we can't use our mobile phones whilst we're driving. And the person he was chatting to, he said, oh, that sucks. That sounds like a right pain. And his response was, no, actually, it's really good. I think they realised that by using a mobile phone, we're at increased risk, and they don't want us to be at that increased risk. So I think it's really good that I work for a company that's not prepared to put us at risk like that. And I think for me, that kind of brought it all full circle, and kind of when I take a step back and realise that that's why we did it, and that's why the business got on board with it. And yeah, it's a nice story to finish off on. So
it is. You've had that's a nice conversation piece. So I've got a pile of questions, so I'll get through as many as I can in the last few minutes, if that's all right. What's the medium age of your sales team, just out of interest?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know. I would say, actually, I'm just going to park that. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Andrew. Question here from, where is it, Daniel? Funding-wise, do you have sort of an indicative figure of how much it cost you to develop the sort of campaign and manage and how you made the case to management?
Yeah, it didn't actually cost. There was no capital expenditure for us in terms of we didn't have to engage an agency, like I said earlier. In terms, there was obviously hidden costs in terms of time for consultation, time to develop the policy, and time to take people off the road to train them at their sales conference, for instance. But in terms of, was it a safety program that we had to invest in, like create content and resources? No, because most of the resources are out there that we could just leverage from other markets or that was already out and about in the media. That's
great. So, Apple Watches. Question from Vanessa. Much of an issue around them at all?
That's a great question, Vanessa. We haven't at the moment, no. I guess looking at our policy around saying that you must not do anything you would be distracted, that would distract you whilst you're driving, it would be captured by that. But I think it's such a good question. It's something we probably need to look at, to be honest. Yeah.
Question on data. Have you been seeing an incidence or change in reduction since you've done the rollout?
So this rollout was part of a wider safety strategy, if you like, road safety strategy. We've seen a significant reduction in our collision rate in the last 18 months, but I don't have any data that can specifically call out and say that is due to distracted driver reduction.
And what happens if someone's caught using a mobile phone? Question from Stephen.
Yeah. So running alongside this, there would be we use a fair and just culture, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So there's no hard and fast rule on what happens. It's case by case, but there is a disciplinary process and an action that follows if someone is caught.
So consequence framework.
Yeah.
Last question here from Jody. How do supervisors respond to not being able to contact staff on the road? And would you have advice for construction sites where a lot of them use machinery rely on two-way radio communication as well as operating?
Cool. So the first part of the question, our sales team just got on board from the start, again, when saying that this is the stance we're taking and that this is a way you're going to have to change the way you work with your teams. Once they recognised the why, they were happy to deliver the what, so to speak. So that was it. In terms of the construction site, it's not an area that I've got too much experience in, and I wouldn't know the level of distraction in that area. But I think that the same model would apply in terms of if we know people are distracted when they're talking, are our people talking for? Is it necessary for them to talk? If it isn't, then let's stop that. And if it is, then let's make sure that's done in a scenario where they're not operating high risk machinery or at risk, basically. Like, it's not an area I'm too familiar with, but hopefully the frameworks I've showed today and the elephant might be able to help with that challenge that you have.
Excellent. Well, we've run out of time. I know we still have some other questions, so I do apologise for not getting to them, everyone. Would you like to leave one sort of message to the audience on what we've just discussed?
Yeah, can I leave two? One
Two.
would be, if you don't already use the Apple Do Not Disturb or Android or Samsung, then just recognise the power that can have on people that you communicate with or might text you. And the other part is share the resources, share that video with people you care about, because it can make a difference between them getting home and safely in the day and something catastrophic happening.
Great. I might just squeeze one little one in. This is quite easy. Brendan just wants to know, has sales improved or not? I think it's a pretty interesting question from your side.
I'll have to ask the sales director. I can't answer that one at the moment.
We'll see.
Let's hope so, because that's always the company, right? So,
awesome. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Thank you very much to Luke for sharing. Our next webinar next month is with SPX Protection around how they actually use telematics to influence their safety management systems of their organisation. And as always, thank you all to our audience for the fantastic questions you filtered through. So I hope you can join us again in the future. Thank you very much.